If you're in favor of freedom of speech, that means you're in favor of freedom of speech precisely for views you despise. Otherwise, you're not in favor of freedom of speech.
Good evening, dear listener. You're listening to Binghamton Review Live, last show of the semester, right before finals week. I'm Patrick, and we're back with Matt and Jordan.
Hello. Hello, beautiful people.
And it's going to be a reflective episode. We're going to be looking back on some stuff that happened this last week, as well as the death of a former president. We're going to be looking at his legacy. So why don't we start off with Jordan's topic? Jordan, what do you have for us?
Well, since you asked, Patrick, I have here a story out of Russia, and this comes from the Russian news agency TASS, which is basically like the most factual you can get in Russia. It's the headline is U.S. and NATO to give Russia a last chance to save INF Treaty. And so for those that don't know, the INF Treaty is the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, and it was first signed in 1987 by Ronald Reagan, and so basically what is happening now is Trump has accused Russia of violating the treaty, and he said something like they've been doing it for years or whatever, and of course Trump being Trump, he didn't give any specifics. And so Putin's kind of mad, and this article basically outlines how he said, if you guys pull out of the, meaning the U.S., if you pull out of this treaty, we are going to do the same thing, and we're going to basically meet you tit for tat, if you will. And so it's like, yeah, you wanna do this? Okay, then we'll do this, and retaliate. And I don't really know a lot of the history about the violations, but I do know that we have also violated this treaty by setting up bases that are capable of launching Tomahawk missiles in the direction of Russia, or toward the direction of Russia, in Poland and Romania. And so Putin and his administration argue that that is also a violation of the deal. So basically it's a bunch of he said, she said kind of stuff. And my problem with this is a long, this is a long tradition that we have of backing out of agreements with Russia. Like there was the ABMT, and what the ABMT is, it was first signed in 1972, and it's the I cannot speak tonight. The Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty, which I actually learned about in my I took a Russian politics class last semester. That's where I first heard of this, and it was first signed in 1972 and ended by President Bush in 2002. And Putin was just rising to prominence at the time. He was in office for 2 years at that point, and that was really the start of a turning point in the relations between our two countries, because Putin got really mad that Bush pulled out of of the agreement. And so there is a precedent for this kind of thing. And I guess basically what happened was, what I remember from my Russian politics class is Putin said, yes, we will we will shrink our nuclear capabilities. That's what I would, if you guys do it too. So Putin held up his end of the bargain. He did not totally denuclearize, but he did shrink a little bit. And after initially promising that we would do the same thing, Bush was just like, yeah, about that. No. And so that made Putin very angry, and Obama did a similar thing where he promised to renew the ABMT, and he didn't do that either. He told Putin that, like, yes, I will totally renew this treaty with you, and then Putin, then Obama was like, oh yeah, did I say that? What I meant was, no. So...
Sounds like a red line.
yeah. So, so there is a precedent for this thing. I'm not just blaming Trump for this, but I will say that, and before Matt interjects here, I will say that the problem that I have with the Trump administration is you can't just pull out of every deal we've ever made. You can't just, like, willy-nilly. I mean, that's not how international relations is supposed to work. It sets up a really bad precedent. Now, like I said, I supported him withdrawing out of the Paris Climate Accord, not for the same reasons that he gave, but I did support getting out of that. But I did not support him getting out of the Iran deal. I don't support him getting out of this deal. You can't... It sets up a really, really bad picture of the U.S. in people's minds, so people think in the future, well, why should we make deals with the United States if the United States is just going to withdraw anyway? So it really puts us in a tough spot when you pull out of all these agreements like Trump has, and it's honestly kind of scary to me. So I don't know what's going to happen as a result of this. Nobody knows, but I'm actually a person, and then I promise, Matt, I will let you go. I'm actually a person that I think that if we can make it happen, I'd like to see the U.S. and Russia not necessarily be allies, but work together and collaborate. And I think we could do a very good job together. And Russia has been very good at fighting ISIS, mainly through Iran, but they've also promised to fight ISIS as well and have assisted Iran in doing that because Iran is one of their closest allies. So I think they could be an important quasi-ally in the region to keep things like terrorism and all that kind of stuff and radicalism under control in that region. So I'm not very happy about this.
Okay, so I do agree with the administration with this. This was not just Trump. The tests came under Obama, where they were looking to see if Russia actually had capabilities that they claimed that they didn't have. And the whole Trump being Trump, not giving information thing, there actually is information. It's the SSC-8, which is an intermediate range ballistic missile that Russia has, and that they claim they don't have. But every NATO country has, we showed them our intelligence, and they have agreed, and NATO itself has said the United States is adhering to this treaty, Russia is not. And we didn't just pull out, we said, Russia, we know you have this, you have 60 days to fix it before we pull out. So I don't mind the U.S. pulling out of treaties when there's a good reason for it. And as long as we cite that reason. In fact, it gives other countries incentive to not break their side of treaties, which is something that's happened a lot. That's something that happens when one country is so powerful that they're trying to maintain the status quo so hard that even if another country decides to skip on their requirements, the United States will just pick up for them. And we see that with NATO military spending. Every country is supposed to spend 2% of their GDP, and all but 6 of them don't. But the United States has such a vested interest in keeping the status quo that they just pick up the bill for them.
Now that I actually agree with Trump on. I'm with him on the NATO issue.
Yeah. So I don't think this is unreasonable, where you have a treaty and one side's not following it. Like, what are you supposed to do? You're supposed to denuclearize, and they don't. They just don't have to. Sometimes, if you want to avoid war, you have to threaten war to make the other side feel like you are serious in your threats. And in this case, it's not actually war. That's just like the most extreme example. But it's like, if you want denuclearization, you actually have to threaten that you won't do it either. if the other side won't do it, you won't either. Why should Russia have nukes and we don't? And in the past, we have denuclearized with Russia. I did look it up. You're right. We did withdraw from, what was it, the ABMT?
Yeah, the ABMT.
We did withdraw from that, but that was because we had fears that we were going to get nuclear blackmailed. So we gave Russia 6 months' notice, which was in the treaty that we could do if we wanted to withdraw. Which still, I don't agree with that necessarily. I don't know much about it, but just on the surface, it seems like we should have stayed in that treaty. But in general, I don't see a problem with this, considering that most other countries in the international system agree that we are adhering to the rules of the treaty, and Russia's not. We are researching, and we're researching these types of missiles, but we're not actually building them, and we're not deploying them, which isn't against the treaty. We're allowed to research it, which that's Russia's main complaint right now. It was in our budget to research these intermediate ranged missiles, but that's not against the treaty. We're allowed to research it. We're just not allowed to deploy it. So when it comes to the international stage, credibility is important, but also, like, you have to look out for your own interests. If one side's not following a treaty, then why would you stay in it?
Well, they say, I'm not, I don't really know much about, I'm not an expert on U.S. and Russian relations, but they say, the Russians say, now of course you gotta take what they say with a grain of salt, but they say that we have also violated the deal by setting up, or by having plans at least, to set up Tomahawk missile bases in Poland and Romania.
That's not against the treaty, though. We're allowed to have plans. We're allowed to do research. We're just not allowed to actually do it.
Mm-hmm. And but I think, but I think my whole point is that instead of threatening to pull out, I think we should try to, and I think President Trump might try to do this. I think we should try to work something out and say, all right, what can we do as the United States to incentivize you, Russia, to follow this agreement, and what can we do? Like, is there something that we could do to make you more comfortable abiding by the agreement that we've had with you guys for 30 years now, 31 to be exact. So I would pursue more that approach where you're still kind of being diplomatic, if you will. But Russia has to understand, and both sides really have to understand that there will possibly be consequences if you violate the terms of this treaty. And so I think we just need to sit down with Putin, with the Russians, and say, what's going on here? What can we do? So that's sort of my position on this, and I think that you'll half agree with me, Matt, on that.
Yeah, that's not called diplomacy. That's called negotiating from weakness. Like, why are we making a deal with a country, they break it, and we go and say, okay, what can we do now? How do we fix this? Like, I don't know, this isn't like a broken relationship. This is the United States with one of the largest autocracies in the entire world. Our job isn't to make them comfortable. Our job is to be the most powerful country in the world to enforce international peace. So if they're not holding up their side of the deal, the incentive is, hey, if you don't do that, then we're going to have more nukes than you, and then you can't do anything. Like, we're going to beat you. We want the world to be less nuclearized, less dangerous. But however, if there's going to be nukes, we want them in our hands, not yours. So
right, but some nations view that as hypocrisy. Do you understand what I'm saying? Like, some
the United
nations
States is the hegemon of the world and the leader of liberal democracies, Western ideas, freedom, as opposed to
That's
Russia,
not
who
true.
is aggressive. Yes, it is.
That's not true.
Well,
Absolutely.
who would be the leader?
We've actively impeded democracy in many places around the world. We've overthrown democratically elected governments because they've violated our...
That doesn't
our-
mean that we aren't the leader of Western democratic ideals. Just because we have a certain foreign policy that some leaders had different, like that's just different types of foreign policy, whether you're an interventionist, whether you believe in stabilizing, like how you actually go about having a country, like that's a type of foreign policy where many U.S. leaders in the past have preferred a stable autocracy than an unstable democracy. And that's not stupid, that's just a different type of policy, where we're not destabilizing regions, we're trying to make it so that everything stays put, everything stays stable, we can control everything. But that doesn't mean that the United States isn't the largest, the hegemon of the world, and the largest country with the values of democracy, Western ideals, freedom, which is a lot better for the international community than an aggressive state like Russia, who also breaks their treaties very often. So, saying that we'd rather the nukes in our hands than yours is not hypocrisy. That's just like, hey, have the power here. We beat you, we're the hegemon now. Our ideals govern the world. You have to deal with that. If you're gonna break our treaty, fine, do it, but we're gonna have more nukes than you. 60 days, Russia. Do it or don't.
Well, on the somber note, we may move on to our reflections on number 41 and his legacy on the presidency. And
Wow, what a transition.
yeah, well, yeah. So, despite being in office for only 4 years,
Such a shame.
yeah, what have you guys maybe liked the most about H.W. Bush's presidency? What have you sort of disliked?
Well, President Bush was at a really big disadvantage. The economic situation he was given, the international system he was given.
Sounds like he
And-
inherited a mess.
He did inherit a mess. And he had a democratically controlled Congress the whole time who didn't let him do anything he wanted. But he was an absolutely excellent foreign policy leader. Even the cases where I don't necessarily agree with his original choice of action, he carried them out all perfectly, especially in a time where he was the first president where the Soviet Union was collapsed. Like, Reagan gets all the credit for ending the Cold War, and he deserves it, but Bush was the first one to, like, have that transition time period. He did a really good job monitoring that, making sure the Soviet Union didn't go the way Germany did after World War I. And there was also other situations like in Panama and Iraq where he carried them out very gracefully. He was considered a very skilled foreign policy president, a very skilled commander-in-chief, and I totally agree with that. His domestic policy wasn't considered as good, but again, that's because we had a economic crisis that wasn't his fault. That was the fault of like the Fed, and similar to in 2008, we had a housing crisis that you couldn't really blame on Bush. Same thing you couldn't blame on other Bush. Wow.
Ah, the two Bushes.
Great.
There you go.
Didn't even realize at first. Okay. So that really was bad for him. The Democratic Congress really hurt him a lot. The read my lips, no new taxes, and then
Oh, yeah.
eventually he had to raise taxes. Again, I would be really, really mad if my president did that. If I voted for a guy who said I will not raise taxes and he did. However, it wasn't like Bush was like, all right, guys, let's go out there and raise taxes. He, like, sat with the democratically controlled Congress and tried to make a deal with them, and they wouldn't do it. They were like, we're doing these tax increases. Sorry. Again, I'd be mad too. I would totally rip on President Bush at that time that he raised taxes as well. But it's unfair to go that hard on him when it was like, it's not like he turned Democrat at the end of his presidency. Like, that's stupid. And he should have won a second term, but Bill Clinton.
Because H.W. can't play the saxophone.
I mean, maybe, who knows?
Yeah, we'll see. Well, I can't really ask him now, but
Well.
anyway. Jordan, your thoughts?
Yeah, President Bush is or Bush 41, to avoid confusion, is a pretty mixed bag. On the one hand, he did dismiss a lot of his party's, some of the adherents in the party, I should say, to trickle-down economics, which he called voodoo economics, because in reality, I mean, yeah, it sounds great, but in reality it doesn't work. And so he wasn't afraid to push back against that. And he did, and I totally give him credit, as Matt just did, for overseeing the collapse of the Soviet Union. I totally give him credit on that. On the other hand, though, one of the most egregious things that he did in terms of foreign policy was he bombed an air shelter. What am I saying? An air raid shelter. That's what I should say. From Iraq. He bombed it knowing that there would be civilians in this shelter, and he just bombed it, and as a result, yeah, here it is. Okay, so during the Iraqi-Kuwait conflict, there was an airstrike on an air raid shelter by the U.S. In February 1991, and the Pentagon and Bush both knew that they were used as a civil defense air shelter during the war, air raid shelter during the war, and they just bombed 408 Iraqi civilians. And he also escalated the drug war. In fact, there was this incident where he basically lured this kid, this drug dealer, into selling the government crack, and then just totally ruined this guy's life over it as a political tactic to basically ramp up support for the drug war. And
is that the commercial where he's like, this crack was sold across from the White
yes,
House, like,
yes,
it's killing your children?
That's the one.
Yeah,
yes,
yeah.
yes.
Okay.
And he was also complicit, if you will, in the Iran-Contra scandal. And, you know, so he is, like I said, in my opinion, a very mixed bag. It's not like he did a horrible job. No, actually, when he was president, he actually did a decent job, especially in terms of cleaning up the mess that Reagan left behind. But you know, it's a very mixed bag, and the media has just been giving him fawning praise, and, you know, not looking at the other side. Yes, his legacy is not all bad, but it's also not all good, and I don't think that we should whitewash that. That's all I'm saying.
Okay, first of all, Reagan's awesome, so I'm just going to throw that out there.
Reagan's, man.
Yes, thank you. Family
There were
members.
record debt and deficits under Reagan.
Yes, because we were ending the Cold War. That happens sometimes. Anyway,
Space Force.
First of all, President Bush deserves all the media praise. He was the president of the United States, and he just died. He had a great life. He was the most qualified, one of the most qualified candidates for president ever. I mean, he was head of the CIA. He was UN ambassador. He signed up for World War II in the Navy, got shot down, still completed his mission. Absolutely a great person, like, as a human being. He was a great person. And we don't see a lot of that, but either way, this is, like, something that, like, is more surreal to me, and because I noticed it, that only 39 times has this happened in history where a U.S. president has died. And that just seems really, like, low. Like, we're actually this is the first time I'm really witnessing it as someone who could understand how surreal it is, and also as a person who, like, respects the offices of the president as much as I do. He deserves all the respect he does, and similar to whenever Jimmy Carter dies, or Bill Clinton dies, which hopefully is not for a long time, but when that happens, it's still going to be sad, and they still deserve to be respected for the office they held. So I think Bush actually did do a really good job. I think he was a great person, and one of the things that I think is a real shame that's happening now is when liberal media is using Bush to attack Trump. Like, oh, look at this, George H.W. Bush died, and he was such a great man. Oh, so much better than Trump. Like, remember when people had class? And now we have Trump. And they just do this for every single president. They did it when W. Bush ran. They just compared him to the old Republicans. Like, oh, can you just remember when we had X-president and there's such class? I'm like, oh my god.
Right. Now that I agree with. That I agree with
criticize
you.
that president for being a racist or a sexist or for being an old crazy loonbag. You criticize John McCain and Mitt Romney and George W. Bush and George H.W. Bush and Ronald Reagan and every single one of them. You criticize for this, and then now that we have a different one, now you go back and praise the old ones. It's just a way to club the new one. And I find it really disgusting, and that's why we have Trump in the first place, to be honest, is just calling every Republican that ever ran for office a racist, sexist, homophobic, old loonbag. Loonbag, yeah.
That's a good one.
Specifically for John McCain and Ronald Reagan, they call them crazy. But when you do that so often, you're gonna get the people who you attack that often to be like, alright, well now we want someone who attacks back. So just, can we please just like honor the president's death? And I promise I'll do the same when Jimmy Carter dies, and I promise I'll do the same when Bill Clinton dies. This should not be a partisan thing. This is the president of the United States, one of the 44 of them, because one of them was president twice before.
Yep, you're right.
Grover Cleveland was 22 and 24, so there were only 44 individual people.
Epic.
There were only 44 of them. Can we please just respect the office whether we don't like their politics or not?
Well, yeah, so we'll see, how people treat Bush's legacy moving forward.
I hope very well.
Hopefully
I hope
very
he
well.
goes down to the history books as a really good president and a really good person, because he was.
All right, well, that's all we have for today. We are done for the semester. Hopefully we'll be back next semester. Different time, maybe. If you want to find out the different time, we'll probably be posting it on our Facebook page, so that's where to find that. So hopefully you have a lovely week. For any students listening, good luck on finals. And
Gosh.
Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, and have a Happy New Year.